It goes without saying that most video games cast players in the role of a single defined protagonist. After all, taking on the persona of one character tends to make for a more immersive gaming experience. And what are video games if not wish fulfillment? But there are those few games which have instead opted to toy with conventions by unexpectedly placing players in the shoes of other, totally left field characters. Sometimes these surprise shifts happen for just a level or two. Wait, what?
Yeah, sometimes it's just a level or two, but other times games just entirely switch the main character, whether you like it or not, and yes, why this is my video now. Why do you ask? Needless to say, at worst these character swaps left fans irate, while at best we got a short, controversy-free compliment to an otherwise great story. Either way, nobody saw it coming. My name is Adam Cleary, my sincere thanks to everyone who's still watching, and these are 10 video games where you unexpectedly swap characters. Number 10, Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Perhaps the most infamous example of a protagonist switcheroo occurs in Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. The highly anticipated sequel was largely marketed on the presence of a returning Solid Snake, but Hideo Kojima being Hideo Kojima, things were not as they seem. Though Snake does serve as the protagonist of the hour-long tanker prologue sequence, here he is looking at a woman's breasts. He's presumed dead in the fallout, and players are handed control of a rookie operative named Raiden for the rest of the game. Despite MGS2 being actually very good from a gameplay perspective, the protagonist bait and switch remains hugely divisive to this day. Crybabies of the age calling Raiden an off-putting void of charisma and, for real now, who is this boy band reject, why can I see his bulge? To rub salt in the wound, Metal Gear Solid 3 also ditched Solid Snake in favour of a prequel story focused on Big Boss. And it wasn't until 2008's fourth game that players were finally reunited with the series' beloved hero, albeit old and haggard though he was. Number 9, LA Noire. For the overwhelming majority of Rockstar's groundbreaking crime thriller, players take control of LAPD detective Cole Phelps. Though for the game's final 3 missions, amounting to about 2 hours of gameplay, the perspective shifts to his private investigator pal, Jack Kelso. After being shut out of his own investigation by the corrupt police department, Phelps becomes a supporting player in the story, with Kelso taking the lead for the remainder. This, and shield your teeth from my spoiler hammer here, culminates in Phelps drowning in the game's final mission. For some fans, this robbed them of the opportunity to finish Phelps' arc on their own terms, while others felt that Kelso, arguably a far cooler character, should have just been the lead all along. He says, mashing X for doubt. Number 8, Max Payne 2: The Fall of Max Payne. Yes, the Max Payne series is centered around the awesome John Woo-inspired revenge crusade of the titular NYPD cop. A man who taught me that the correct way to take painkillers was just to chew them as loudly as humanly possible. In an attempt to avoid staleness, the second game briefly changes things up at the halfway point by having Max become incapacitated after falling out of a window. Players are then handed control of Max's lady pal Mona Sachs, playing a sequence of the game which previously occurred off-screen as she shoots away through a construction site filled with goons. Better still, players have her use her sniping skills to defend a vulnerable Max, after which they're handed back control of the titular hero. Now, much like myself, Max Payne 2 is short enough that it ends long before it can run out of steam, but even so, this was still a fun mid-game perspective shift that delighted fans. Number 7, Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. Given that this was conceived as a fond farewell to globe-trotting mass murderer Nathan Drake, and I mean, for real, the guy has killed literally thousands of people, it seemed logical that we'd spend the entire game playing as him, right? Well, no, because Naughty Dog had other ideas as you briefly play out 2 other characters during the epic campaign. Oh well, I mean 3 technically if you count that Crash Bandicoot scene, which of course I do. In the game's 5th chapter, we briefly switch from Nate to his brother Sam as he carries out his prison break. And in the years later epilogue sequence, we're given control of Nate's teenage daughter Cassie as she explores the Drake house and eventually learns of her parents' adventurous past. Was the latter there to set the stage for playing as her in another Uncharted game someday? I'm not saying it was, but I am thinking it extremely loudly. Number 6, Mass Effect 2. Near the end of Mass Effect 2, players briefly have control of Commander Shepard taken away from them after they depart the Normandy in a shuttle. Mere moments later, and the ship is attacked by the Collectors, who quickly board it and start ruining a lot of afternoons. To help send them packing, players then control Joker as he attempts to get the ship to safety. The mission, if you can even call it that, just lasts a matter of minutes and doesn't amount to much more than running around the bowels of the ship as the collectors lay waste to all of your crewmates. However, after spending the prior 95% of the game playing as the ultra-capable Shepard, this was a clever, if mercifully temporary shift of perspective, confirming how much of a murder shagging the regular folk are in for. Number 5, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. COD has admittedly split its campaigns between numerous characters ever since its inception, but the groundbreakingly original Modern Warfare did something a little more out there which absolutely nobody saw coming. And by nobody, yes, I mean me. Though players spend the first 2 missions of the game being introduced to protagonist Sergeant John Soap McTavish, the third mission abruptly thrusts them into the body of President Yasser al-Fulani, who it turns out has been kidnapped by terrorist Khaled al-Assad. While technically more of an interactive cutscene than an out-and-out mission, it nevertheless offers up a grim depiction of al-Assad's violent coup, culminating in al-Fulani himself being executed with a gunshot to the head. There he goes, as dead as my music career. This was a uniquely horrifying way to make the player hate al-Assad. And though the game ultimately switches between numerous military personnel throughout, that brief spell playing as a helpless, doomed man was, well, different. Number 4, Alien Isolation. Ah, yes, here we are, the game I absolutely despise purely because of how much I love it. The story, the protagonist, the concept, the gameplay, the low-key, sinister VCR tracking aesthetic, I adored everything about Alien Isolation, aside from the vivid nightmares it gave me about hiding under a desk. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yes, character switches. Okay, so about halfway through, Amanda briefly interacts with shady Initiadora captain Henry Marlowe, prompting a flashback mission in which players take control of Marlowe as he explores the derelict from the original movie. In addition to being a fantastic dose of fan service as players get to gawk at the lovingly recreated interiors of the derelict, the flashback also confirms the circumstances through which Sevastopol Station came to be infested with xenomorphs. Marlowe's wife was attacked by a facehugger, he brought her to the station to receive aid, yada yada, I admire its purity, etc, etc. Number 3, Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness. Rushed to market and largely panned by critics for its janky gameplay and general lack of polish, Tomb Raider TAOD also made the cardinal sin of taking Lara Croft away from a Turn O' the Millennium audience that lived and breathed her triangular, those. Instead, they were forced to play as her sidekick, Curtis Trent, a man with no boobs at all for the final few levels. His more limited moveset makes him a real pain to play as, and his missions amount to around an hour of game time. An hour! 1 whole hour without them! Mercifully, more planned Curtis content was actually cut from the final game due to the rushed development, and it was later revealed that the publishers only put him in the game in the hope of creating a spin-off franchise. Yeah, right, like anyone's going to buy a game where you have to play as a guy. Number 2, Red Dead Redemption. Conventional wisdom tells you when your protagonist gets turned into a fine paste during the game's climax, that's probably the end of the playing time. However, as an epilogue set 3 years later shifts control over to John's young son Jack, it's not. In fact, it's really not, because you set out for revenge on the very man who gunned down your father, and again, teeth hammer spoilers, you get it. Better still, even after that, you're just free to roam around doing cowboy stuff, and it never really ends. Rockstar even repeated a similar trick with Red Dead Redemption 2, shifting the perspective from Arthur Morgan, also dead, to none other than John Marston himself, still alive. Granted, this time around, we did largely see it coming. Number 1, The Last of Us Part 2. Alright, okay. Here we go. Though most players understandably assumed they'd spend most of The Last of Us 2 playing as either Ellie or Joel, Naughty Dog pulled the rug out a mere half hour into the game. After being given control of Abby for a brief spell, we resume playing as Joel and then, well, The biggest twist, however, comes at the game's midpoint. Ellie finds herself attacked by Abby with the majority of the game's remainder then playing out from Abby's perspective in the lead up to this confrontation. Only in the game's final hour do we once again play as Ellie. Now, while this did really upset a lot of dudes with tiny dicks, it's a bold move that's been critically lauded. Changing Abby from a two-dimensional villain to someone with an equal claim on revenge, even if that second half of the game does become a bit of a slog to get through. The game's central thematic premise is the notion of perspective, so it was certainly a clever way to get them thinking differently about Joel's shocking death at Abby's hands. Doesn't matter how you might personally feel about it, you gotta hear both sides. So there you have it, those are 10 video games where you unexpectedly swap characters, read to you not by Ash Millman. Let me know what you made of it all in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share and subscribe. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I have been Adam Cleary, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.